The night sky over Ouagadougou appeared calm, masking the tension mounting within Burkina Faso's heavily guarded presidential residence. Ibrahim Traoré, young yet seasoned by conflict, stood by the tall window of his command room, watching the city lights flicker below. In his left hand, he gripped a classified intelligence dossier, proof of covert Israeli operations on Burkinabe soil. Satellite images, intercepted messages, and bribed local officials. Everything was documented. Moments earlier, his senior advisors had urged caution. Handle it diplomatically, they said. Send delegates, involve the African Union, avoid direct confrontation with Tel Aviv. But tonight, something within Traoré shifted. Too many resources had been taken. Too many backdoor deals struck behind closed doors. Too many silent nights, pretending powerful nations could be reasoned with. He turned to General Kabor, his loyal defense chief. Prepare the national address. Tonight we speak our truth to the world. Kabor swallowed hard, fully aware of the stakes, war or something dangerously close. Inside a secure underground bunker, Traoré's media team set up satellite feeds. Presidential guards sealed the compound to prevent any surprise attacks. Traoré changed into his olive military uniform, the same one he wore during the uprising against corruption. When the red recording light blinked on, he faced the camera with the same intensity that had earned him admiration across West Africa. Brothers and sisters of Africa, he began. Tonight, I speak not just as Burkina Faso's president, but as a son of this continent, betrayed by those who see us as tools. He paused. Israel believed it could step onto our soil, purchase our loyalty, exploit our resources, and fund militias to break us from within. Behind the scenes, his generals exchanged tense glances as the president continued. But today we say, enough. Israel has crossed the line. From this moment forward, Burkina Faso is prepared. We do not seek conflict, but if conflict comes, we will respond, and we will not stand alone. The broadcast aired across every local network, sending shockwaves through African social media. From dusty rural towns to bustling city cafes, people watched in stunned silence. Lowering his voice for the closing lines, Traoré declared, Africa is not for sale. Africa will not bow, and tonight the line is drawn. The signal faded to black. But the storm had just begun. As the speech echoed across West Africa and beyond, embassies scrambled to assess the fallout. In Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Netanyahu convened an emergency war council. Traoré had made the intelligence public. Satellite evidence, financial transactions linked to Israeli accounts, and intercepted plans to sabotage northern Burkinabe mines. The revelations struck a blow to Israel's intelligence presence across the continent. Back inside the war room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Secure radios buzzed with activity. General Kabor was the first to speak, his tone serious. Mr. President, we need to prepare for retaliation, drone strikes, cyber intrusions, maybe even assassins. Israel won't ignore this. Traoré leaned over a large map of West Africa, spread across the command table. Red markers showed Israeli-linked contractors, shell companies, and weapons caches positioned throughout the region. He pointed firmly at a dense cluster near the tri-border area. These are our first targets. Freeze their accounts, expose their operatives, make them visible. They shouldn't be allowed to operate in the shadows. And if any mercenary raises arms on our land, take them down. Outside the command center, Burkina Faso's elite forces were already moving. Armored vehicles patrolled the capital, deterring any whispers of a coup. Traoré knew all too well betrayal often followed the influx of foreign money to local rivals. Only a few could still be trusted. Young officers drafted formal statements for both the African Union and ECOWAS, urging African nations to stand united and reject any covert agreements with Israel as the crisis unfolded. Traoré's approach was deliberate. He intended to elevate the issue beyond Burkina Faso and turn it into a continental cause. Within hours of his address, protests broke out in Bamako, Niamey, and even parts of Lagos. University students carried signs reading, "Africa is not for sale," and declared solidarity with Traoré. Still, not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Some government ministers, in private, expressed concern that Traoré was pulling a struggling nation into a confrontation with a global military force. Rumors of a soft coup quietly circulated. Some even considered removing him, claiming it was in the nation's best interest. Traoré was aware of the whispers. He had faced gunfire before. He would not shy away from betrayal now. Looking President Kabore directly in the eye, he said, "If Israel wishes to test our will, let them come. But tell our people, we do not fight for Burkina Faso alone. We stand for every African who's tired of being manipulated in someone else's game." Within a day of Traoré's bold statement, international media turned its spotlight on Ouagadougou. Western broadcasters labeled him impulsive. African youth hailed him as courageous. In Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Netanyahu authorized a covert task force, Unit Raven, to dismantle Burkina Faso's communications command before further information was revealed. But Traoré was already ahead. Working with trusted tech experts and engineering students from the University of Ouagadougou, he secured the nation's digital infrastructure. His team blocked spyware that Israeli contractors had embedded in the country's telecom networks years earlier. Standing beside him, General Kabore reviewed urgent field reports. Unmarked convoys spotted near the Niger border, unidentified drones hovering at night, and suspicious foreigners in local establishments posing as aid workers. Traoré read each report with a steady, focused gaze. Then he launched a counteroffensive, not with weapons, but with facts. At sunrise, his government released a cache of documents revealing Israeli brokers bribing corrupt officials to gain control of uranium and rare earth mining concessions. He aired confessions from detained agents who admitted to orchestrating sabotage operations across the continent. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Africa Resists and Traoré Leaks dominated online platforms. Even hesitant African leaders, wary of public backlash, were compelled to issue statements denouncing foreign exploitation. Inside Traoré's palace, tensions were rising. Some senior generals, offered asylum and financial support by Israeli intermediaries, met discreetly, plotting to remove him before he caused irreversible damage. Among them, Brigadier Douamba, a stocky figure, leaned in close to whisper betrayal into Kabore's ear. But Kabore, now fiercely loyal, informed Traoré directly. That evening, under the pretense of a sudden security exercise, the plotters were quietly apprehended. Their travel documents and stashed funds were confiscated. On the outskirts of the capital, preparations intensified. Special forces increased their patrols, and civilians stepped up, forming local watch groups. On airwaves across the nation, Traoré's message was clear and unwavering. The summoning of an army of Huth. We stand as Africans. No more secret deals, no more stolen futures. If they bring war, they will meet our courage first. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the capital resembled a fortified stronghold. Yet, surprisingly, it also felt more united than ever. Civilians delivered supplies to barricades guarded by local volunteers. Motivated by Traoré's stance, young students painted walls with messages like, "Africa belongs to us," and "We do not surrender." Inside the presidential bunker, Traoré gathered with his most trusted commanders and advisors. Maps showing suspected Israeli contractor bases glowed beneath harsh fluorescent lights. He turned to Kabore and spoke firmly. "Tonight, we strike first. We'll disrupt them so thoroughly they'll hesitate before launching another drone." Kabore nodded, tapping on his encrypted tablet. "Our units are ready. We'll hit 3 locations at once: supply depots near the northern border, a hidden communications relay near Kaya, and a safe house in the capital where handlers meet local operatives." Traor's gaze shifted to the youngest officer present, 25-year-old cyber warfare expert Adama. "And your team?" Adama grinned. "When the power cuts at midnight, they won't see it coming. We'll leak every document, every transaction, and every corrupt official on their payroll. By morning, their local network will be in ruins." Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the capital, Israel's elite covert unit, Unit Raven, had arrived. Disguised as international journalists, They installed surveillance along Traoré's known motorcade routes, hoping to catch him off guard. But Traoré no longer moved without deception. His real motorcade was now a mobile fortress, armored vehicles, layered security, and elite special forces. When Unit Raven intercepted what they believed was the president's SUV, they were met with empty decoys and hidden snipers ready to strike. Gunfire broke the silence. By sunrise, 2 Israeli operatives had been captured. Their confessions, extracted under pressure, were broadcast nationwide. Traoré addressed the nation. "This is Africa's struggle for dignity, and we do not bow to Tel Aviv." In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu slammed the table in anger. Every plan he had laid was crumbling, but he wasn't ready to concede. Turning to his defense counsel, he ordered, "If Traoré wants a real war, then he'll see the cost of defiance." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré readied for whatever came next. As news of the failed ambush spread, the city ignited with chants of unity. Makeshift signs appeared everywhere, reading, "Traoré fights, we stand." The streets swelled with volunteers, reinforcing barricades, determined to defend their ground. Inside the underground command center, supplies were being distributed. Traoré leaned over a flickering map. Kabor reported promptly, "2 captured Israeli operatives have confessed. We now know their safe houses and supply routes." Traoré remained composed. "Good. Tonight, we cut off their leadership and expose their networks to the world." Special forces acted quickly. In the forests near Kaya, they stormed a concealed relay hub. Servers were destroyed, encrypted radios seized. Meanwhile, in the capital, cyber teams broadcast damning evidence, ministers accepting bribes. Before sunrise, resignations followed. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's advisors urged caution. But he slammed his fist. "No, Traoré embarrassed us. Deploy the drones. Destroy their defenses now." But the Israeli drones faced a surprise. As they crossed into Burkina airspace, they were hit by unexpected electronic jamming. One after another, they fell harmlessly into farmland, collected later by laughing villagers. By morning, Traoré's face was on every radio and phone. "This is bigger than Burkina Faso. This is for every African child who deserves freedom from foreign control. We will not back down." Watching from a shadowed war room, Netanyahu realized too late. He had underestimated a united people's resolve. That same morning, the African Union called an emergency session, half online, half in crowded halls, in Addis Ababa. Leaders who once distanced themselves from Traoré now leaned toward their screens, tense but newly attentive. Traoré spoke first, live from his war room. Surrounded not by decorated generals, but by farmers, engineers, and local militia commanders, ordinary citizens, ready to protect their homeland. "Brothers and sisters," he began, voice firm despite visible fatigue, "Israel's leaders believed Africa would submit. They thought our dreams were for sale, but they forgot free people do not negotiate in chains." Delegates murmured as footage played. Downed Israeli drones, villagers celebrating beside captured tech, confession videos from compromised ministers weeping as they named their handlers. Back in Israel, Netanyahu struggled to maintain order. Protests erupted outside his residence. Opposition leaders condemned him for dangerous power plays, and ordinary Israelis began questioning the cost, both in secrets lost and damaged credibility. In Burkina Faso, Traoré issued a bold executive order. Nationalize all foreign link mining operations suspected of funding subversive activity. Troops secured the sites. Workers applauded as foreign security contractors were escorted out under military watch. In just 1 week, Traoré transformed a hidden conflict into a public resistance. And Africa, bruised but alert, began to rally, not just behind a leader, but behind a vision. Africa must stand alone, or it will never stand at all. As Traoré's declaration echoed, towns across Burkina Faso ignited with purpose. Volunteers lined up at recruitment centers. Village elders offered blessings to departing defenders. Women organized support brigades, preparing meals, sewing uniforms, and collecting supplies. No foreign drone could detect the quiet intelligence moving beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's inner circle was in disarray. Audio recordings leaked and aired by African news outlets exposed Israeli agents offering bribes to local leaders, seeking to block roads and disrupt water routes. This betrayal ran deeper than any missile strike. It attacked the foundation of local trust. The international response was sharply divided. Western powers, torn between long-standing ties with Israel and increasing outrage across Africa, issued vague calls for calm and dialogue. But across public squares from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, citizens held up signs that read, "We stand with Traoré. Africa is not your colony." Inside his fortified compound, Traoré met with regional military leaders. A worn map of West Africa stretched across the table, marked with stones to indicate troop locations. Leaning in, his voice steady and charged, he declared, "We do not fight for gold or revenge. We fight so that our children will know." We refused to crawl. A heavy silence followed. Even the most seasoned fighters, shaped by years of conflict, felt the gravity of his words. They understood this was no longer about Traoré alone. It had become a statement. Africa would no longer yield to covert agreements shaped abroad. Outside, the night sky glowed with scattered campfires, each flame a symbol of resistance stronger than any foreign contract. At sunrise, the first convoy from Burkina Faso's newly formed defense alliance rolled toward the northern mining belt. Rusted trucks, reinforced with scrap metal, carried eager recruits who sang liberation songs louder than the engines could roar. Alongside them marched veterans, many of whom had once fought rebels backed by the very networks Traoré now accused Israel of supporting. Satellite imagery soon revealed unexpected developments. Local villagers were seen blocking access roads with stones and logs, not to halt their own army, but to stop enemy mercenaries. Hunters, armed with old rifles and deep knowledge of the terrain, formed night patrols. They knew every valley and hidden trail, paths satellites couldn't trace. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu faced a fractured cabinet. Some pushed for immediate escalation, a show of strength to suppress Traoré's resistance. Others urged caution, concerned that images of African mothers, children on their backs waving flags of defiance, could damage Israel's standing in global opinion. International reporters poured into Ouagadougou, but rather than retreat, Traoré appeared on camera daily. "They thought our silence was weakness," he said in a live broadcast across Africa. "But it was patience, and patience has reached its end." In hidden radio stations, resistance leaders sent encrypted messages. Farmers shared meals with troops. Teachers trained students to take cover at the sound of drones. The mobilization wasn't ordered. It rose from shared conviction. In the tense hours before the first confrontation, one thing had become unmistakably clear to Netanyahu's advisors, and to the watching world. Traoré had turned an entire nation into his greatest shield. The first border clash began just before midnight near the disputed phosphate fields. Israeli-trained contractors, wearing no official uniforms, tried to disable Burkina Faso's new radar systems, but they underestimated the readiness of local militias who had waited weeks for this moment. Under moonlight, gunfire echoed across the dry savannah. By morning, reports reached Ouagadougou, 2 soldiers lost, but the radar station remained intact. Upon hearing the news, Traoré immediately gathered his war council. Around a battered wooden table, maps were reviewed, coffee mugs shaking with each firm hand strike. Traoré's voice rose above the tension. "They have money and machines. We have land, people, and purpose. We bleed here." They bleed in headlines. Back in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's team weighed retaliation. Could they launch a deeper strike into Burkina Faso without drawing criticism from their Western allies? Every action came with political risk. Internal leaks made global headlines. Israel considers direct action in West Africa. Bifos, Igashes, Kini, Emet, Amiga, Ka. In Burkina Faso, fear had shifted into determination. University students organized blood drives. Village elders called for unity and prayers under baobab trees. Every mother knew where the nearest shelter was. Every farmer had dug hidden supply caches. When Traoré spoke again on national radio, his tone was measured but firm. If they seek war, they will find it here, and they will lose it here. Africa is awake. Across the continent, people gathered around radios and TVs. For the first time in a generation, Africa did not feel isolated. It felt prepared. By the final days of the standoff, the world's attention had narrowed to a strip of dry land between the Sahel and the Sahara. Satellite images leaked once again, this time capturing the heartbeat of a continent no longer asleep. Online footage revealed rows of armored vehicles, drones circling unseen borders, and a heavy silence, broken only by the distant hum of news helicopters. Inside the presidential bunker of Burkina Faso, President Traoré paused briefly before stepping into the command room. Walls lit up with maps, enemy positions, and live updates from his field commanders. He ran his finger along a thin red line, the likely path the Israeli mercenaries might take if they advanced further. An aide rushed in, breathless. "Mr. President, the world media is waiting. They're asking if you will consider talks." Traoré stood tall, adjusting his green military uniform. His tone was calm and firm. "Tell them. Africa does not bargain with its dignity." When he appeared live across global news channels, millions watched him lean forward at the microphone. His words reached far beyond national borders. "We did not choose this conflict, but if you threaten the future of our children, we will lay your ambitions to rest, here, on African soil." Meanwhile, in Israel, Netanyahu's government, already weakened by internal leaks and growing protests, faced mounting global criticism. Allies began to reconsider diplomatic ties, arms suppliers grew hesitant, and internal divisions within his cabinet deepened. At dawn on the 10th day, Israeli forces pulled back from the border outposts under drone observation. Not a single shot marked their exit. They left behind burned paths and a continent more united than before. In Ouagadougou, church bells and mosque prayers rang in unison. Market women danced in celebration. Young soldiers embraced tearful families. Amid that fragile morning light, Traoré understood this was more than a battlefield success. It was a statement that Africa's fights would no longer be hidden or quiet. As he stepped onto the palace balcony to address a crowd of cheering citizens, he remembered every mother, orphan, and farmer who held on to a dream greater than fear. "Africa is not your playground," he whispered to the breeze, "and we will never bow again." Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just witnessed is more than a political standoff. It is the awakening of a continent's determination. When foreign powers tried to crush the hopes of an emerging African nation, Traoré stood firm, not only before tanks, but before treaties, and proved that when courage is rooted in the people's will, it cannot be broken by threats or wealth. This story reminds us that real leadership is not about personal glory. It's about the unborn generations. It's for the farmer working his land, the mother feeding her child, the young dreamer who sees beyond the past. Traoré's stand is not just Burkina Faso's, it is Africa's message to the world. Challenge our leaders if you must. Question our resources if you will. But never again assume our silence means surrender. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay alert, stay resilient, and remember, history bows to those who refuse to bow themselves.